are listening to Setting History Straight with Linda Watson on Hebrew Nation Radio.
Okay, so we're going to start here with the history of Esau and his destiny. All right, so we're going to find out a lot about Esau and who he is and where he is, and we're going to go through his history. I think this is just fascinating stuff to me. First, we're going to start with the background information, and there's two lines. There's two lines that run through rulership in this world. One started with Noah and Shem. So Noah, when he came into the new world, which was really a new world after the flood, he landed in Turkey, and his son Shem would take over his rulership after he had passed away. Now Berosus, who was a historian in the 4th century, wrote about the history of Noah. And it's very interesting because Noah ruled the world from Rome. He ruled it from Italy. That history goes back to the World Compendium. If you want to go back and look at that history, it's online. It's called the World Compendium History of the World Compendium. It's written by Dr. Herman Hay. Really, he taught ancient history, and he just had some amazing stuff. So this is going back to his information. But Noah would eventually pass his line to Shem, and Shem would be what we would call the Melchizedek. Now, the Melchizedek and the patriarch was the same thing. That's interesting because Abraham's father had died, his brothers had died, leaving him the position of the patriarch. Now, Melchizedek means two things. It was a row or a line that went through history, but it also represents the Messiah because the Messiah is called the true Melchizedek, right? But there's this line that has gone through history, started basically with Noah. It may have even started before that, but it definitely started with Noah, and it got passed to Abraham. When you go to that story about Abraham, he met with Shem, which was the Melchizedek of his time, and they had bread and wine. If you remember that story, it was after Lot had been taken, kidnapped, in his family, and the 4 kings of the earth had been taken down by Abraham, and then Abraham then went and had bread and wine with Shem, and that was the passing of the baton from Shem to Abraham. Now, Shem was known as the man who would never die, and because he had outlived 10 of his grandchildren. I mean, that's just amazing to outlive 10 of them, but that's what he had done. And so that line passed to Abraham, and from Abraham it went all the way through to the Israelites and into the last king of Israel, which was Zedekiah. And then Zedekiah's daughter would go in and marry, and now Dan does this history. She would go into the land of Ireland, and she would marry the king of Ireland at that point. And then that whole line would pass into Scotland. And Scotland, the Scottish kings were the true, both lines, that's where both lines of the breach had been healed. Because you had Tamar, she had 2 sons. One was the line of the Jewish kings that went through Phares all the way through. Okay, and that's where Zedekiah came from. That was the last king of Judah. And then you had the Trojan kings. And the Trojan kings would go into Troy, and they would go into Greece, Athens especially. And then eventually that whole line would also make its way into England and to Ireland and into that area. So interesting, the Trojan king line would go into Britain through a king called Brutus. And Brutus was it's around the 11th, 12th century, somewhere in that BC. So he would establish his kingship in that area in London. And that is interesting because the Scottish people, I feel like that's one of the reasons why there were so many wars going on between the Scottish people and the English, is because the English really wanted that throne of Scotland. They wanted to sit on that throne of Scotland. They wanted to occupy that throne of Scotland because that was where the breach was healed. When the little princess, which was Zedekiah's daughter in the fall of Judah, she went into Ireland. She married the king that was already in Ireland, who was a Trojan king. That healed the breach because you had both lines of coming together in Ireland at that point. Well, that line passed into Scotland. So this is the reason why when you get to the history in England, that these kings in England understood this, that they knew that they were from just the line of Troy. They knew that they were just from the line of Troy, but they knew the Scottish had both lines in their lineage. And so that was one of the deals that was made with King Edward, is that he wanted to marry his niece named Joanne to David, who was from that same line. He wanted to marry those two together, and that stopped the fighting between the Scottish and the English and gave the Scottish their, Declaration of Independence, which happened around 3020, if you remember, because that's when they signed the abroad. And so interesting, because that would pass that same line into the English throne, which is where it sits today. You would have both Zerah and Pharez, the breach being healed on the English throne. Now, we also know, and Dan teaches this, their king line went from really Joseph of Arimathea into Britain. And we have King Alfred the Great, who was the king of England. He said that my lineage goes back to Joseph of Arimathea, which is so interesting because that is the bloodline of the Messiah. So when the Messiah came, it's very interesting because that's one of the reasons why they knew that he was the Melchizedek, and he legally became the Melchizedek when he was 30 years old. But interesting because he had both the line of David in his lineage through Mary, and then he also, through Mary, his mother, had the lineage of Aaron. Okay, because you remember the story that Elizabeth was a cousin to Mary, so that she was actually a daughter to the sister of Mary. So they would have had the same bloodline. And Elizabeth was interesting because it tells you that she was from the sons of Aaron. So, so interesting, that would put the Messiah having both the Levitical bloodline, the son of Aaron. He would be from the descendants of Aaron, plus he would be from the kings of David. So that put him with both lines that came into fruition. And he went into the temple. There was a seer there, a prophet of some sort, and he said, this boy will be your Messiah, because he probably understood that lineage. Do y'all understand that? So that's the entire, I just took a second to explain that entire line that has gone through history on Israel's side, which is really coming through Noah, Shem, Abraham, and then that it split with Isaac's children, because Jacob went through that line. He went through that same line that David would have gone through, and the Messiah, that same line with Noah and Shem. But Esau, he went through the other line, which is going to come through Ham and Nimrod. So Nimrod would have ruled from Babylon with his mother wife, okay, which was Semiramis. They ruled together, and that history is from Sumer. Sumer was the most ancient city that we have history from. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells the entire story of that city and what went on then, and how he hated, Gilgamesh mentioned how he hated God because he had killed killed so many people in the flood. And so we could see that actual history. We actually have that history from Sumer, and that was that very first town. But Nimrod would also go in and sit on the throne. He would be the second or third king on the throne in Egypt. And so he would have been killed by Shem. According to Diodorus, he went in to have a coffin made. When he went in to measure for the coffin and get inside the coffin, they nailed it shut and killed him. And so got rid of him. So he was a very wicked king. So that line that we talk about, Satan has his own line that is passed through history. That is the line that Esau would marry into. That is the line Esau would marry into. We're going to see this. So I took a little time to explain that there's two lines. You know, it's really interesting because even the people, the Jebusites, when Abraham went to the Jebusites and he said, you know, he wanted to buy land from them, they bent down and bowed down to Abraham and said, Abraham, our prince, because they understood that he was not just a patriarch over his family, that he actually was ruling. And that's what nobody catches, because people don't know this history. So let's go through this history now. This is when you get to the part with the book of Revelations, in Revelation 17, and it starts listing these kingdoms, and it tells you that there are 5 have fallen. One is, well, the 5 that had fallen was like Persia, it was Greece, it was all of these empires that had ruled over Israel at different points. Okay, so that was that line coming down from what we're talking about, Nimrod and Ham. Do y'all see that? That's that line. And so the 6th empire would have been Rome. And then it says 2 more are to come after that. And we're in the 7th now, I believe, which is a socialist empire. And then the last one to come up will be the Antichrist. Okay, now you can see, look at verse 10 here. And there were 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other is yet to come. He must come, he must continue for a short space. And the beast that was and is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goes into perdition. He's of the 7th because he's going to be a socialist kind of government. Okay, that's why he's of the 7th. And so interesting. I'm not going to go into the rest of this explanation, but this is the same line that's being talked about that goes through from Nimrod. And that's what my whole point is. And it may even go a bit further back than Nimrod. Okay. Now, notice this, Ezekiel 31:6, and all the fowls of heaven made their nest in the boughs, and in the branches did all the beasts of the field come forth. Now, the beasts of the field are from that line of Nimrod. They would also be the evil people in the earth, bringing forth their young. So under the shadows dwell all great nations. So under the shadows of these people, the beasts of the field, bring all great nations. This is the great nations we're talking about here that are mentioned: the Persia, Rome, Greece, even Egypt and Babylon. Those are the main ones that they're talking about, that dwell under the beast of the field. Do y'all see that? So the Father's linking this thing back to its origins, which is a satanic type of government. Now, we're going to read what it says about Assyria. Isaiah 10, verse 5, O Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in the hand of my indignation, I will send him against a hypocritic nation, that's us, against the people of my wrath, and I will give him charge to take the spoil and to take the prey and tread down in the mire of the streets. Now that's talking about the war that's coming. Deuteronomy 28, verse 49, the Lord will bring a nation against thee from far and from the ends of the earth, as swift as an eagle flies. So he's associated with an eagle. Do y'all see that? That's his symbol. We're going to go through this. I want to show you pictures here. This is a double-headed eagle. This goes back to a drawing that came out of old ancient Assyria. Do y'all see that? Now here's the stamp that has come out of old ancient Assyria. You see the double-headed eagle. You're going to see the double-headed eagle everywhere. Now, this is in the wall that was in the ancient ruins of Assyria. It's a swastika. Swastika. It's amazing in the history. Just amazing the history. Now, let's get to Genesis 26, verse 34, 35, describes Esau's marriage at the age of 42 to Canaanite women. He married 2 Canaanite women. And when he found out that his father and mother wasn't pleased, he also went and married a different woman. We won't get into all that lineage, but he married into the progeny of the Edomites at this point. And this is really interesting because he married into that Hittite line. He actually married 2 of the princesses of the kings of the Hittites. Now watch this part. This is the Hittite. This is a symbol from the Hittite archaeology. And this is from the Hittite Empire. Do y'all see that? Hadassah was the capital. And they found this in the gate. This was at the gate. And you can see the 2-headed eagle here. Now, here it is. There's another picture of it. Do y'all see it? And this was the actual Hittite Empire that was basically taken down somewhere around the 12th century. I think maybe around the same time that Troy fell, because Troy would fall around to the 12th century also. And they would fall to basically what we call the seafaring people, which we know that the tribe of Dan was among. And how do we know that? Because Dan was over here in Greece and he had come out. It actually talks about him. Deborah talked about him in the book of Joshua. And it says, Dan, why are you still in ships? Because Dan had come out of this area into this area of Greece. And when you look in Europe, you start seeing all the rivers that came into that area. All right, so interesting. And notice this, the Midianite kingdom, which was also, I believe, was Esau's kingdom. And I could do some history on this for you sometime. This is really interesting because they extended, they took in all the other brothers like Ishmael and all the other brothers and formed them into like a confederacy. And they actually lived in this area and they eventually pushed their way down into India. And we know that because the Indians pick up on that history in their Vista, their ancient history. They pick up on that history and they said our ancestors were blonde-haired and blue-eyed and they worshiped many gods. Well, that's the Hittites. The Hittites were known as the people who were the people of 1,000 gods. And so that's how India became Hindu. They worship many gods because they learned it from the Midianite kingdom. Do y'all understand that? Very interesting because that kingdom was associated with some of Abraham's other children, the Midianites, and many of the others had linked themselves together in a very loose confederacy. And that's who they're talking about here. So interesting. See, here it is. You can see the area of the Hittites right here. And you can see the Midianite kingdom. and it would eventually work its way down. And this was when the children of Israel were in Egypt. They began to push the Midianite kingdom began to push its way into India. So again, we're going to look at some of this. You can see right here a double-headed eagle. Can y'all see that? This is from drawings from the Hittites. And now we want to get into another piece of Esau, which is Tyre. They called it Tyrus. And they settled themselves into that area around the Mediterranean Sea. And they were known for, and really Esau was known for wanting money and wealth. I mean, he wanted money and wealth, and that's one of the reasons why he wanted his inheritance. And of course, he didn't get it. You know, Jacob got that inheritance, but he wanted it because he wanted wealth. And so the establishment of Tyre, which we're going to talk just a little bit about, I want to show you that history because this ties back to Esau also. Now, it's actually talked about how they went into South America. Tyre had ships that went out. Those were the Phoenicians. They went out to South America. They went out to America. They went out to all parts of the world. But the history is actually covered in the Bible. This is Ezekiel 27, verse 26. Thy roll has brought thee into the great waters. The east wind has broken thee in the midst of the sea. And now here is an inscription that is in one of the libraries or museums in South America. I don't know which one, but this is what the inscription says. We are children of the Canaanites from Sidon, of the eastern kingdom of merchants, and are cast, I pray, beside the center of the mountains, offer a gift to the most high gods and goddesses in the year of 19, the king of Aram. So that ties you back to the time of David. Do y'all see that? Because that's who was reigning at that time, was the king of Aram. It's actually talked about in scripture. I pray still strong that the valley of Zargilber of Red Sea, hereby we journeyed with 10 ships, and we're at sea together 2 years around the land of Ham. We separated by the hand of Baal and no longer remained among our companions. I pray we have come here 12 men and 3 women at this new land. That is South America. Devoted, I made even the men of wealth bowed the knees and pledged to the most high gods and goddesses with sure. See, they worshiped multiple gods. Do y'all see that? And this would have been some of the people that we're talking about here. Now it says Tyrus, king of Hiram III. The stone was found in 1872 by some slaves in a plantation, and the man named Costa would be his last name. So this is history showing that the people from Tyre had gone into South America. And I just think that's so interesting because I brought that in so y'all can see that. That would be Esau moving into that area. Now, this is Tyre, and it had an island. You see it had an island here, and it had a mainland. So here's the old city of Tyre over here, and the new island over here. Well, this, you can see Alexander the Great wanted to take this down. So he actually built a little bridge that he could actually come across here and get to this island and take it down. They were able to take down the mainland, but they had so much trouble taking down this area. Even though that has been that was taken down by, by several kings, but, Alexander the Great was the last one. Interesting is you still have inhabitants on it. You still have people that inhabit this area and this area, but the Bible talks about how Tyre will be destroyed totally and wiped off the earth just like a rock and never be inhabited again. So that is not the Tyre the scripture is talking about. Do y'all understand that? Now, this was the main merchant city for the entire world at that point. just like today, New York City is the merchant city for our present world, the main merchant city for commerce in this world. And it also has a mainland and it has an island. Do y'all see the connection here that the Father's actually bringing home? I think is very interesting. Now, going on, we're still with Esau's history. Let's go back and talk about his ancestry. And he married the 2 Hittite women, but he also had a concubine. Her name was Elzephaz, and she married Amalek. We are very familiar with Amalek. You know, that line went in, if you remember the story of Esther, traced his lineage all the way back to Amalek. But Amalek, there was 2 prophecies written for Amalek, and we're going to go over those. Numbers 24, verse 20. And when you looked on Amalek, he took up a parable and said, Amalek will be the first or chief of the nations. So this is where we get the idea that, and this would have been Esau's descendants, right? This is where we get the understanding that this is Rome, because Rome was considered the chief of the nations. And so, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. And that's talking about the end result of Esau and what happens in the future with it. All right, so Numbers 24:24. And the ships shall come from the coast of Chittim, which is Cyprus. It was called the island of Cyprus, but Chittim is also the area that surrounds the Mediterranean Sea, and shall afflict Assyria, which it would be Assyria, and afflict Eber, which would have been Spain. Now, one of the descendants of Abraham was Eber, and his name means to cross over. He went into Spain, and Spain was not called Spain until the 14th century. It changed into the name that it has now. But before that, it was called Iberia, and it was named after Eber. So he's saying on the coast of Iberia, Spain, and Assyria shall be afflicted, and that really, if you remember in history, were the 2 locations for the Habsburgs. That was the 2 locations. They were in Spain. Those 2 kings were the ones that were ruling Spain in 1492 when Columbus left and went to America. Okay. And they were under the Habsburg dynasty. And then you had the other Habsburg dynasty in the area, they said Assyria, and Assyria would have been the other Habsburg kingdom, and that was in the area of Austria down into a little further into Bohemia. And so interesting that it mentions these 2 empires, because that's the Habsburg dynasty, which we're going to talk about. Now, Josephus said that the Chittim would be all the coastlands that surrounded the Mediterranean Sea. So here's all the coastlands right here that surround the Mediterranean Sea. Y'all can see all these in pink here. That is Rome. That is the Roman Empire. So Chittim is another name for Rome. Do y'all see that? And Rome would lose some of these territories, and then they would gain them back. And so it was constantly changing, but its entire empire really surrounded the Mediterranean Sea. Do y'all see that? And so interesting, this would be 4 different empires. This would be the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Habsburgs, which was Prussia and Austria Empire, and Russia. We're going to see all 4 of these. Now, let's just look at these. This is the Holy Roman Empire. This is the symbol of the double-headed eagle. Here's the Byzantine Empire. It had a double eagle. Habsburg dynasty. Here's its 2 symbols, its 2 flags. These are their coats of arms. They have 2 double-headed eagles. Prussia has 1 double-headed eagle. German Confederacy has a double-headed eagle. Now you can see how similar Germany, the right, was very similar to the symbol for the German Confederacy. So interesting, because this is the symbol that was in Assyria. It was the symbol that was in the Hittite Empire, and now it's in Rome. Do y'all all see this? Does everybody see this? So now we're going to get to it. It has passed in the Assyrians has their symbols into Rome. I think that's representing the Roman Empire at that time. But you know that Rome would fall in 410, and it would officially, the actual city of Rome would fall, and it would fall to the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, basically. It was the Goths that came in, and those were Israelite tribes. And they had been trying to take down, the Roman Empire had been trying to take down really Parthia, which was the Israelite tribes underneath that was underneath the Black Sea. They had been trying to take them down for centuries because they wanted to expand their empire, and the Parthians were in the way. And so they actually went to war with Parthia 13 times, and they lost to Parthia. Very strong nation, very strong nation. And interesting, it wouldn't be Parthia. Parthia would eventually fall, but it would fall to the Persians. The last major war that the Rome had with Parthia had just been devastating and left the Israelites in a very weakened state. So it was very easy at that point for Persians to come in and push them out of that area, which is what they did. And they would have pushed them, they really pushed them above into the upper area that we're going to be talking about in a minute, which is Scythia. And Scythia is just another name today for the Ukraine. We're going to get into that. Now, I'm going to prove to you that Esau went into the Byzantine Empire. I'm going to prove it right with this slide right here. So there was a king called Zeno, and he was an Edomite king. He was from Assyria, and we're going to look at that word because we're going to see it on the map in just a second here. He married actually the daughter of Leo the First, who was the last of that Roman line. Okay, he married that elder daughter, and his son actually was to sit on that throne, but he would be the grandson of Leo, and when Leo died, so the son sat on that throne, but he was sickly and he died. So that's when Zeno himself started becoming the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, and that's where the line had come through. Zeno would have been the emperor, and now this was in October 25th, 1473. He would have become the Caesar, the new Caesar of the Byzantine Empire. Now, what had happened is, that Rome had fallen. The Western Roman Empire had fallen to the Germanic tribes. So they had fallen. So the Roman Empire had now moved into the Byzantine Empire, and its center was Constantinople. And it's very interesting because Zeno would have been ruling from that spot. All right, now this is Asia Minor that I'm showing here on the map. And you can see where I'm pointing here. Here is the land of Assyria. And it's Isauria. This is where he came from. This is Zeno's homeland. Okay, if you'll notice, this is his homeland right here. And now we want to understand what actually transpired, because what happened here was that his ancestry sat on that throne. Now, let me just take a second here, and I'm going to go bring up, this is the actual king line that went all the way through. It says in John the fourth, was taken down by Michael Palladino. And Palladino would have been this line that we're talking about that goes all the way through. And it says that he, right here, he was the one that who traced his lineage back to all three houses. Okay, now I'm going to just show you this line. It goes all the way through to 1453. 1453 would be when these people would fall.
This is very interesting, Linda, and I've got to say there's a lot of stuff in here that I have known for years and almost forgotten.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
What
So this would be when he would fall, and this whole empire would fall in 1453. 1453 is when the Turks would come in, the Ottoman Empire, and take down the Byzantine Empire. Okay, now, notice this. What transpired when 1453, when the Turks came in, the last emperor, notice his name here, Constantius, the 11th. Interesting that he's the 11th, because that is the number for doom in the Bible, by the way. He would take his little niece and he would marry her to the Russian Tsar Ivan III, and her name was Sophia. Do y'all see this? All right, so the Tsar of Russia, here he is, 1472. He had a political marriage where he married Sophia. That would have brought that family line into Russia. That family line that came into Russia. Now, you would then have the next, he would have a son from this marriage who would become Ivan IV, and he would rule. And so that particular king, the lineage would stop with him. And we're going to talk about why. All right, but notice here, this is the Russian coat of arms, and it has a double-headed eagle. Do y'all see the double-headed eagle here? So the reason it has a double-headed eagle, and you can look at the history of this, is because when Sophia came in, her real name was Zoe. And when she came in, this was her Catholic name, Sophia. So she married into this line. Now, interesting, because the history goes back, let me turn some of this off, because this history goes back to the Sabbath, keeping of the Sabbath. And the keeping of the Sabbath was going on in Russia too. And when I say keeping of the seventh-day Sabbath, okay, was going on in Russia too. And the daughter-in-law of Ivan III and his grandson were both Saturday Sabbath keepers. And that history is covered online with the Seventh-day Adventists. Have a whole series, like 7 or 8 different CDs that they have out there on the history of the Sabbath, and they cover how the Sabbath was in it. Actually, the archbishops of the 2 largest churches in Russia were Saturday Sabbath keepers. That's what was going on. And of course, this woman right here, Sophia, she was of the Catholic faith. So this is why you have the Greek Orthodox Church now in Russia, the dominant church, because this was the switchover that came in with the Byzantine Empire. You see, when they married into that line, do y'all see that there's a line being passed now through history? It started with Assyria. It went to the Hittites. It went into Rome. It was in the western part of Rome first. Constantine was the actual emperor that started the Byzantine Empire, by the way. He moved from Rome to Constantinople and set up the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Empire would fall in 1453 and to the Turks. And when it did, he passed that lineage of his bloodline into Russia. That's your Assyrian connection. That's why when scripture says that I'm going to use the rod of Assyria, he means it. because this is the bloodline that has passed through. Do y'all see that? And so people don't understand this history. And let me tell you, you have to get it, because we want to establish who our enemy is and who's coming in this country. And so we're going to do it through history. Now, this is the picture of her. This is Zoe that we talked about here. We mentioned that she married she married Ivan III. But the lineage stopped with Ivan IV, their son. Okay, it stopped with him because he didn't have any heirs, and so this is interesting, that this is where the family line picks up with the house of the Romanovs. So the Romanovs, which would have been like Peter the Great, they would rule Russia from that point on, clear on it up into present history in this century. Okay, so before that, we want to get into the history of Russia before this. Okay, so I'm showing you how the line is passing through, but we want to get into that history in just a minute here. But before we do that, I want to show you some interesting things. This is the first seal in Revelation 6, verse 1. And behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him has a bow and a crown. Take a look. Do you see a man on a white horse with a bow and a crown? There you go. This is the symbol. This is really the symbol for Germany, but it's also the symbol here for Russia. All right, here's the coat of arms for Germany. This is all of the, you look at the horses. Do y'all see the white horse is rearing up? Do y'all see it? This is not by accident. Here we go. The white horse symbol again for Lower Saxony, which would have been, Saxony is another name for Germany, the old name for Germany. Here you go. This is the coat of arms for the North Rhine. This would be the Rhine River. Okay. Now, you even have the white horse here in that Sagittarius playing that same role in the sky. I saw the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard a noise of thunder and 4 beasts coming out. And you see, this is really interesting because it says, I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow and a crown. There you go. And he went forth and to conquer. And so it's very interesting because it's even being written in the heavens. Do y'all see that? That's Sagittarius. It's interesting. I could get into those constellations at some point. Okay, so I think I've finished this piece, and I want to cover the next piece. This is the piece about Russia. Now we're going to pick up on this part about Russia here. And I love this history. This is the Russian history. We're going to start from the very beginning. And you see that these are the sons of Japheth. Sons of Japheth, they all lived in the area of Turkey. And they lived there for centuries. So you had Gog and Magog, you had the Turks, Madeira, and the Medes. Okay, Madeira was the Medes, okay? All right, now I'm going to show you this old ancient map. Now take a look at this. Here's the Black Sea. Look at the Sumerians here. That's Israelites. They live right above that Black Sea area. This whole area is the Ukraine. The people that were the Germanic tribes lived in the area of Scythia. We know that. They also lived below the Black Sea. These people lived in the area of the Ukraine for more than 600 years. We got a war going on in the Ukraine, and we don't even know that that's our homeland. We don't know it. And that's our homeland. We lived there 600 years. Now, look at this. When Nebuchadnezzar came in, he pushed these people, which was the sons of Japheth, out of the area that he took over. And they went in around the Black Sea area also. So you can see Magog here. You can see, I'm going to show you all of these. I want to show you Madeira, that would have been the Medes. Here's the Caspian Sea over here. Here's Mount Ararat right here, where this is really the area right here where Noah went back in. Notice that Meshach, Gog are all in this area here. You have the Caucasus mountain range right here. You have Tubal right here. We're going to talk about Tubal. There's Gomer, Eskenazi, Tyrus right over here. These are all sons of Japheth. Look at this. Look at these sons of Japheth here. Look at all of them. They all are in this area. And this is at the time that Israel was in, that Israel had gone above the Black Sea. She's the one that really lived. She's the one that really lived in the area of the Ukraine. Now let's get into that history. All right, now really interesting here. We're going to just talk about Tagoma, which are the Turks. Josephus identified some of them as the Philistines. And the Philistines, we hear about them a lot in early history. They lived right here next to Greece. They actually were in Greece. And these would have been, enemies to the Danites, which would have been in this area, which was Greece. And so these people were constantly at war with one another, the Danites. And so interesting this just for y'all to see this. And they would eventually moved into Armenia, it says. So y'all see the history here. Now, we're going to get into the history of Gog, Magog, Tubal, and Meshach now. Now, notice these are the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, and Gog should be as part of that too. Medea, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. That was his sons. And now, we go into more detail. They would have lived in Asia Minor originally, but then they would move themselves up around the Black Sea, and then they're going to push themselves back into Russia. So we're going to get to that history now. All right, so I just want to show you, these are the enemy that comes against our country. Ezekiel 38, verse 2, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Okay, now, these are the nations that are still alive today, that nobody knows where they are, but history is going to identify them. I'm going to show y'all that. Now, it also lists all the other kings. Gomer, Tagoma is going to be in the northern quarter, so that would tell you automatically that they were in Siberian area, and many other people with them. And then it says Ethiopia, Persia, that's your connection to the Middle East. They are going to be also part of this war that's coming. These are the nations, the main nations that are going to come against our nation, which is the unwalled cities of Israel. Now, let's get to the history. Herodotus, do anybody know anything about Herodotus? He lived in the 4th, 5th century. BC, he was a Greek historian, but he was called the father of history. Dan, do you want to make any comments? Because I'm going through this stuff and I know you know this.
Yes, I got Herodotus' book, Histories, out of the British Museum when I was there, and it's very interesting, great book. Everybody should order that to read about history at that time, which is a lot of our Israelite history.
Right. So he mentions Meshach, Tubal. He identifies them as the Mosheviks, and he identifies them as the Samaritans. And he said they lived in northern Asia Minor around the southeast part of the Black Sea. So he's telling you who they are. Do y'all see that he's telling you that Meshach and Tubal are Meshach and Tubal are the Samaritans and the Mosheviks. So these people that we call the Samaritans, they are not the same people that are in the Middle East. The actual pronunciation is Summations. That's how it's supposed to be pronounced, is the Summations. Now notice This is the names. They had different names. The Assyrians called them different names. The Greeks called them different names. Josephus said that the people of his day, known as the Mochivi and the Drobetalites, were found in Meshach and Tubal, respectively. And then that is in Antiquities, the first book, .6. And let's get to the next part of this history. Now, this is the legend that the king Moshe, or his other name was Meshach, was the son of Japheth, and he founded the city of Moscow. But Moscow was called Mos Kiva, okay? And it's still called Mos Kiva today in the Russian language. Most people don't even really know that. This was the son of Japheth, comes straight out of scripture. He built the city and he named it after himself, Mos and Kiva. Kiva was the name of his wife. So the city of Moscow is Mos Kiva, and that is named after him and his wife. So Meshach in the Bible was the one that founded Moscow. Okay, so Moscow would have been spelled Moskiva in Russian. How interesting is that? Situated in the middle of the country in the Mokovi dynasty. All right, now this right here is the Great Duchy of Russia. Now, duchies would rule by a duke, and then the duke had lords under him, and they had territories assigned to them. So this big, huge area, which is just east of the Ukraine, was where Russia was first established. And it's established by these people that we're just talking about here. And the name of that area was called Moskivi. Do y'all see how close that is to Mount Moscow? Now that would have been, do you see, this is the area. Moscow's about 500 miles from the Ukraine. Here's the Ukraine over here. Y'all can see that. So that's about how far it is. So this is where the Israelites were. And this is where Russia is being established, is right in this area. Do y'all see that? Now let's get on with this history. So Meshach was the father of Rushi and Moshi. And so these were the two colonies that were in the Russian territory. They were named after the two sons, okay? And this is the names were preserved for Russia. This is where we think maybe Russia could have came from, but it could have came from another place too, the Mosheviks. All right, and so now here comes the Septuagint, and it's also identifying Meshach as with the same two names. It's calling them Mosh and Rush, and from the Moskivi Duchy. So it's very interesting. Now notice here, you're going to notice that Tubal is in between these two places. He's between the Caspian and Black Sea, and that's one of the sons. But notice how so many names are named after Tubal. So you have the Tubal River, you have Tobolsky, which is a city in Russia. So for a place, for ancestry that can't go back to Japheth, they sure have named a lot of things after these people. Do y'all see this? There's no getting around this. Now, here's the Germanic tribes. This would have been right in the area we call the Ukraine, where our people lived, like we said, for 600 years. And then you had the Vanidi, is the name of this tribe. This is where the Slavic people came from. The Slavic, that word was really slaves, and they were everybody's slaves for centuries. These were poor white people. And they lived in this mountainous area over here to the south, where they lived in this, if you could see this a little better, this is the mountain range, which is the Ural Mountains, is where these people basically lived. And they would push themselves into Eastern Europe. And so this is the area we're talking about here. This would have been the area of Russia at that time. and there's a little blow up of it. And so we get this history from two people. One was called Saint Cyril and Matthias. And now we're going to get into more detail on Magog and Gog, okay? So one of the earliest reclinations of Magog was by Justinian, the father of Greek poetry. He identified Magog with the Scythians in southern Russia in the 7th century. He also would have been a contemporary of Ezekiel. You know, Ezekiel would have been writing at the same time. He would have known, because he wrote Ezekiel 38, right? He would have known where all of these people were. He would have known where Gog was. He would have known where Magog was. He would have known who they were. Do y'all understand that? Now here comes Josephus. He comes back and he says they were among the Scythians. Remember, the Scythians were above the Black Sea. And here's Philo. He comes along, he identifies Magog in southern Russia. There's three references right there that Gog and Magog are going to be in Russia. So all of these people now that are teaching prophecy, they all want to say Turkey is Gog and Magog. And it was ancient. It was anciently. They were there for different time at a different time frame. But they're not there now. Does everybody understand that? I'm showing you from the historians where these people went. Anybody want to make a comment? Yes.
So I actually, before you started going into this, I was going to ask you, what was the difference between Gog and Magog and, you know, the Assyrians that were
different tribes of people, two totally different tribes living in.
But I guess my question was, when you read it in the Bible, you're going through this, it seems like it's talking about the same area and the same people who are eventually going to attack the United States. I didn't know that was the same, but according to what you're describing in history, it's the same, right?
Yeah, depending on when they were writing at that time as to where they would see, because Ezekiel would have known where they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would have known where they were, and he was telling you where they were. I think he actually says it's in the land of Magog. I can't remember how that actually reads, Terry, but I think it says it's in the land of Magog, which would have been southern Russia. The stuff is so amazing. There's so many historians writing about this. You can't identify Gog and Magog with anybody else and Meshach and Tubal except Russia. You can't. And so it's going to be interesting here. We're going to go through the rest of it. Now, Herodotus is coming back again, and he again starts telling you about the Scythians. Now, and then you have, he actually says they were in the steppes of Pontic steppes, which is just a region area there. The Sumerians was the Greek name for the people who were the Israelites. And they basically lived underneath the Black Sea for a long time. And then they, like I said, those would become the empire of the Parthians. Those Parthians would be the people that would eventually fall to Persia and get pushed on up into the area of Scythia. So that's why he's identifying. Do y'all see that? He's beginning to identify some of those people in that same area. Now, he said that this is so interesting, that the Sumerians' name, the name of Crimea comes from the Samaritans, is what Homer is saying. Now, that's a different historian, but he's saying Crimea takes their name from the Sumerians. How interesting. You can actually see that. Can y'all see that? How Samaria, you can look at the word Samaria here and see the similarity to Crimea. See, this stuff is so amazing that you just can't, I mean, the history is so amazing. I mean, you can't, the names are even the same. Now, we know that the Israelites didn't call themselves the Scythians. They called this whole area of that whole area in the Ukraine was called Scythia. but they had different tribes of people living there. And one's tribe would have been, you can see the Sumerians up here. And so you have the Sakai people. They called themselves the Sakais. Israel called themselves the Sakais, which is the name for Isaac. So, you don't have vowel sounds in the Hebrew language. So this is called Sakai. They're calling themselves Isaac. And that goes back to scripture that says, by Isaac will you be named. Isaac, you're going to take your name from Isaac, which goes right back to this same analogy right here. This was the Sakai people. They also are known as the Saxons, right, in history. Now, here you go. So in this area, which is the Ukraine, is where the Germanic tribes went in. You can see it. They, like I said, they lived there a long time. The Slavic people were on the other side of Russia. That would have been the Valdese that we talked about. The Thracians were down a little further. That would have been Greece, some parts of Greece. Alexander came from that particular empire. And the Baltic people, I'm not sure who they actually were. Now, we're going to go into a little bit of history of the Slavic people. They were called Nuries. And Herodotus wrote and mentioned that Meshach and Tubal are identified as, like we said before, as the Sarmatians, the Mosheviks. And these are the people who would push the Germanic tribes into Europe. So here's, in this area right here is basically where we have the Ukraine. The people that were in this area, which was really the Gog, Magog, Tubal, Meshach, all of these people. And the Sumerians were the people that pushed, they would come in here. They were the true Gog and Magog. They would push the Germanic tribes into Europe. They would actually push all of those people, which were all the Germanic tribes, into, now this would be an overthrow, okay? And then the Sumerians would move themselves into the area of the Ukraine. And so that happened around the 2nd century, and after the 2nd century of the Common Era. And that's when the Israelites tribes began to push themselves into Rome. And they came in, if you remember the story, they came in basically as
mercenaries.
Thank you, mercenaries. They came in as mercenaries into the Roman Empire. And eventually they came in and took down Rome. Honorius was the emperor of Rome at that time. And when Rome fell, he called for the troops to come out of England, the Roman troops to come out of England and come in back to help defend the homeland. Well, when he did that, that's when the Anglo-Saxon people moved themselves out of Sweden, Norway, the upper part up there, which was really Joseph's children, Rachel's children. They all lived in that area. They moved themselves into Britain at that time. And there was no big deal. The British people just accepted them. Why did the British people just accept them? Because they were the same people. That's why. And so it would be the Samaritans that would push the Germanic tribes into Europe. And that is when we start seeing the history of the Germanic people, the Franks, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths. I can go into that history another time, but it's really better to let Dan do it because he does a better job than me. So the Slavic people would be the same people. Slavic is more of a language. Do y'all see that the language of Russia is Slavic? And then they have the Tatars, which are Turkish. So you have different nationalities of people there. So this is so when I'm talking about Eastern Europe, a lot of these Eastern European countries would be Slavic. They would be in Eastern Europe. Now, not all of them, and this is the others. So you would have two main groups. You would have the Slavic people that are in Eastern Europe. And then you would have the Samaritans, which basically can go on in and taken over the Ukraine, which are the true Russians today. All right, so that's the 1st century. Now, and here's just another picture of the Ukraine, Kiev, and you know, so that you are familiar with what we're talking about here. And the Sea of Azov is where, in this area is where, when Troy fell, this is where the people were brought and left right in this area right here. That would have been around the 12th century. They would have come in when Troy fell, and they would have settled in this area. Dan, can you tell them who brought them? Okay, I'm sorry.
I got so many notes for you, man. This is the best one you've ever done. I cannot disagree with anything you've said.
Okay, all right. So the Sea of Azov, when Troy fell, I know the answer to this. Who was the man who brought the migration of the people to the Sea of Azov? You know.
Well, we may not agree, but it was Thor.
It was Thor.
It was the grandson of Priam.
See,
that's right.
People don't realize that all the names of all the days of the week come from these Israelite leaders. I mean, I can take every one of those names in the days of the week and show you that they are Israelite leaders. But we don't even know that today. They have Captain America. You know, somebody used to tease me all the time because they said, you know, Thor was, you know, Captain America. Well, yeah, it is. Because we still today have all these action movies that have Thor in them, but we don't even know why. I mean, it's unbelievable history. Now, notice right here, the Napa River, that is named after Dan. I wish I had all the rivers that were named after Dan on a page here so y'all can see this. Just so that you have a real good idea of what area we're talking about here. I just keep bringing these maps up so you can get a real good feel. Here's Russia, you know, Moscow, and here's the Ukraine. Now, you see how the Slavic people began to push themselves into these areas. We talked about that, but not all of them are Slavic. Let's get through that. You have the Romanians and Hungary are not Slavic, and there's some others. Lavita and Estonia, they're not Slavic either. Lithuania is not. They're different from the Slavs. Okay, now let's get to this history. This is where the Vikings come in. Now, in around the 8th century, the Vikings actually had moved themselves into the area of I guess you would say the Ukraine. Okay. And they had moved themselves into northern Russia, it says, and they were trading. So they came in and established a trading post, and they would come down to Greece, to the sea where Greece was, and they would trade there. Do y'all see that? And so they established a trading post, and their king was Roski. So this is some of the same other meanings. Roski was from Sweden, and he has just established the dynasty and would rule Russia until Ivan IV. Remember, it stopped with Ivan IV, and the Romanov dynasty came into play after that because Ivan IV never had any children. Okay, so this is where we get the name. The whole name at that time was called Kiva Rusk, and for many centuries, you know, this whole area had been ruled by the Mongolians, which would call the Golden Hordes. But this would eventually be taken down by these people that we're talking about here, which were really from the tribe of Benjamin. Had it come out of Sweden, they would have been the tribe of Benjamin, and they moved themselves into this area. This is who we're talking about here, is the tribe of Benjamin. And they would rule up until Ivan the Fourth, and then the Romanov kingdom would come in then, the dynasty. So interesting, I want to read you what Jerome said. And he's writing in the 4th century AD, and I'm going to read this whole thing. And he writes, the savage tribes in countless numbers have overrun all parts of Gaul. Gaul is the name for France. It was a huge area that went all the way from up to the top of Europe down to Spain. The whole country became a country between the Alps and the Pyrenees, became between the Rhine and the ocean, lay waste to the hordes. And it starts mentioning all of these tribes here, the Vandals, and these are all a lot of these are Israelite tribes he's mentioning here that have come in, at the Alans, the Bergerons. I'm not going to go through all the names. So he's mentioning these. Now watch what he says here, and this is in Jerome's letter 123, section 16. He writes this. Remarkably, in the same letter, Jerome wrote, Assyria is joined with them. So all of these tribes, he calls them hordes, but all of these tribes, and they hated the Germanic tribes, by the way. So that's why they called them the hordes. That all of these tribes that are mentioned right here, he said Assyria was with them. So Assyria would have been in Europe. Do y'all see that that's what Jerome is telling me? Assyria would have been in Europe. They would have been that Habsburg dynasty. They would have been in. Now I've done history all the way back to that beginning of that area of Austria. That's fascinating stuff. They had that same symbol of the double-headed eagle way back when they were just a duchy. And I have history to show these. Now, interesting here, all of this is language, Indo-European languages. Notice how it's all the same type of language. Do y'all see all the area here? All of this is what, and another name is called Germanic language, because these are all those ancestors here of Shem. And you can see here, these are the ancestors of Shem, and they all would have a similar language. Do y'all see that? And so the whole thing is just amazing here. Now I'm going to get into some of the hollow groups here, and I have just a picture so you can look at the bottom here. You see that I1, N1, N1, those two areas, that would actually be Ashkenazi. I'm going to show you that a little bit here. This would be Turk, J2. And here is Israel. This is the Germanic tribes, R1B. And then you have R1A would have been the Slavic, more of the Slavic people. All right, here's I2 and I1. Now notice here, C3 would have been Mongolia. And this is just some of the Oriental. CO would be Oriental, you see that. But notice that R1A, it had pushed itself way down into this area of right above India. This goes back to that same history that you taught, Dan, about how the Israelite tribes had pushed themselves into China. So interesting. Now I want to show you this. This is such an amazing thing. All right, notice how all the lines, these are genetic lines here. All of these nations are coming out of where? They're coming out of the area of Turkey, which is exactly right, because that's where Noah would have landed. He would have landed there. You see how they moved out. It's showing here their paths. This is all genetic groups here. How they moved out, they pushed themselves into different areas. Notice that you can see the lines. You can see where A goes all the way over here into America. You can see how, and I'm trying to track some of this for you so y'all can see this. you basically see a lot of L right in here, but on different maps, you will see A, B in this area here in Africa also. Notice that there was a big push to move some of the people into India. Do y'all see that? Into that area of India. Then eventually they would be moved to China. Do y'all see how they would move to China? And then they just spread from there. So you see, once they got to China, then you get A, B, C, and well, not C, A, B, and D. They're moving themselves over in here into the Americas. Those are the American Indians, and they go down. You'll see that they go down into South America. Then they move from China again down into this area, down even into Australia. Do y'all see that? This is amazing stuff. And you see how A is living in this area right here next to the tip of Russia. Y would have moved itself over here too. This is amazing stuff because this is showing the actual travel of all of these nations, which I just think is fascinating. So you can actually see how they travel. So what happened is that most of the tribes that had moved into China are the ones that moved into the United States across the land bridge and were in the western part of America and then moved themselves down into South America. Now, is that not amazing? I think it's amazing. Now, see up here where it says C, that would have been Mongolia. So they would move too. Now, this is the tribes in present day. R1A is the Eastern European people. R1B is the Israelites, Israelite people. This would have been the other children of Shem, by the way. Right here, N1B and N1C. I think, now this is N1B is where the Ashkenazis lived. This is where the Ashkenazi Jews, this is where the area where they lived. And then, they would eventually push themselves down into Poland, but they came actually also from Spain into Poland. So interesting stuff. And then you see N1C would be the Finnish, some of the people in Finland, the Lapps, and some of the others, northern Russia. Okay, so I think that's
the tribe of Issachar is the Finns.
Yeah, it would be. Yes. So I must be finished. Okay, so man, we went a long time on this. So I'm just going to stop it right here.
For more information about this broadcast, please visit our website at www.12tribehistory.com. That is the number 12, tribehistory.com, or email us at lwatson44@cox.net with any questions or comments.